I was filled with excitement as I packed for what I thought would be an incredible family trip with my husband Tom and his family. It was supposed to be our first trip together since getting married, and I was looking forward to joining a tradition his family had been doing for years. My relationship with my mother-in-law, Sandra, had always been somewhat distant, especially after Tom and I moved in together. Still, I was hopeful this trip would provide an opportunity to bridge that gap and grow closer to her. As I zipped up my suitcase, Tom reassured me, "Don't worry, Emma. Everything's taken care of. Mom and Dad always cover the expenses for everyone on these trips." I relaxed a little, grateful to be joining this well-established family tradition without the stress of finances. However, the day before we were set to leave, Sandra asked me to join her in the kitchen for a quick chat. Her tone was casual, but the words she spoke would change everything. "Emma, I know you're new to the family, and I just wanted to clear something up," she began, her eyes avoiding mine. "You're not really family yet, so you'll need to cover your own expenses for the trip." Her words hit me like a punch. I was stunned, but Tom said the family expenses were covered. I replied, trying to mask the hurt and confusion in my voice. Sandra waved her hand dismissively, as if it was nothing. "That's for family, dear. I'm sure you understand. It's only fair since you're still new." I forced a smile, trying to keep my composure despite the sting of her words. "I see. Thanks for letting me know, Sandra." But inside, I was reeling. As soon as she left the room, I picked up my phone, my hand trembling as I dialed Tom's number. "Tom," I began, my voice shaking. "Your mom just told me I'm not considered family and that I have to pay for myself on this trip. Did you know about this?" There was a pause on the other end of the line before Tom responded, his voice tight with anger. "What? No. She never mentioned that." "That's not right, Emma. We both knew this wasn't just about the money. It was about something deeper. The unfairness of the situation, the feeling of being excluded from a family I had just officially joined." That night, as Tom and I lay in bed, I couldn't shake Sandra's words from my mind. Tom squeezed my hand, his voice soft but firm. "We'll figure this out, Emma. Together." It was then that we began formulating a plan. A plan to show Sandra that we wouldn't be pushed around or made to feel like outsiders. We were determined to take a stand. The next morning, as we drove to the airport, the tension in the car was palpable. Tom kept glancing at me, his jaw clenched in frustration, his eyes flicking between the road and me. He was just as upset as I was, maybe even more. "We're not letting this slide, Emma," he said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "What Mom said isn't okay." "I know," I replied, the knot in my stomach tightening. "It feels like she planned this, telling me at the last minute like that." "Yeah," Tom agreed, letting out a heavy sigh. After a pause, he turned to me, a new resolve in his voice. "Listen, I have an idea." I looked at him. My curiosity piqued despite the heaviness in my chest. "What if we just go somewhere else? Just the two of us," he suggested, his voice cutting through the tension. "We can still go to the airport, but take a different flight." His words echoed in my mind. For a moment, I was shocked by the boldness of the suggestion. Was he really proposing that we ditch the family trip and go on our own adventure? But then, a flicker of excitement began to grow inside me. "Exactly," Tom said, his eyes lighting up for the first time in days. "Let's book a flight to San Francisco. We've talked about going there forever." I thought about it, the idea taking root in my mind. San Francisco. It was spontaneous, rebellious even, but it felt right. It wasn't just about escaping the family vacation. It was about reclaiming our space as a couple. "Let's do it," I said, feeling a surge of excitement. "Let's take back our honeymoon phase that she tried to ruin." Tom pulled out his phone and started browsing flights while I drove. We found a flight to San Francisco, leaving at almost the same time as the family's flight to Hawaii. With just a few taps, our secret getaway was booked. "We'll still go to the airport with everyone," Tom planned aloud, his mind working through the details. "We'll check in together, but when it's time to head to the gates, we'll make up an excuse to split off. Maybe we'll say we're grabbing coffee or something." I nodded, the plan taking shape. "And then we just won't show up at their gate. We'll go to our gate instead." "Exactly," Tom grinned. "And once we're on the plane, I'll text Mom. I'll tell her that since you're not considered family, we decided to do our own thing." It was simple, bold, and empowering. That night, as we packed our bags for a trip only the two of us would be going on, Sandra's words still lingered in my mind, but they no longer had the power to hurt me. The thrill of our upcoming adventure overpowered any bitterness. The next morning at the airport, the usual pre-flight chaos buzzed around us. Sandra was busy handing out boarding passes, her voice loud and commanding as she went over the plans for the Hawaii trip. She had no idea what was about to happen. The family chatted excitedly about the beaches and activities they had planned, while Tom and I exchanged knowing glances, our secret brewing beneath the surface. As we walked towards the security line, Tom leaned over and whispered, "Ready for this?" "More than ever," I whispered back, surprised by how confident I sounded. Despite the crowds and the noise around us, I felt calm as we moved through the airport. We were doing something for ourselves, something that felt right. As we blended in with the family's usual routine, Sandra remained oblivious to the rebellion that was about to unfold. "Everyone, remember we're meeting at gate 24, Sandra called out, her voice ringing with authority. We nodded along, playing our part. But as we neared the security checkpoint, Tom gently tugged on my arm, steering me towards a nearby coffee shop. "We're just grabbing a quick coffee," Tom called out casually to the group. Sandra barely gave us a glance, too focused on organizing everyone at the gate. Once inside the coffee shop, we waited until the family was out of sight. Then, quietly and without looking back, we slipped away in the opposite direction, heading toward our own gate for our San Francisco adventure. My heart raced as we made our way through the crowded airport, casting quick glances over our shoulders to make sure no one from the family had spotted us. It felt like we were characters in a spy movie, sneaking through the terminal with a secret plan. The tension was palpable, but the excitement of our decision to break away from the family trip and embark on our own adventure kept us moving forward. When we finally reached our gate and saw the departure screen confirming our flight to San Francisco, a wave of relief washed over me. We sat down, our nerves easing slightly as we realized that our plan was truly underway. Tom hesitated for a moment before pulling out his phone. He typed out the message that would sever us from the family vacation, the final step in our rebellion. I watched as he composed the text to his mother. "Mom, since Emma isn't considered family yet, we decided it's best to do our own thing this time. We're heading to San Francisco instead, and we'll spend the week there. We needed to do what's best for us right now. I hope you understand." With a deep breath, he pressed send. The message was out there, and just like that, our decision was final. We turned off our phones, choosing to block out whatever responses might come in and to focus on the adventure ahead. The relief was immediate, but there was an underlying tension, knowing that we would eventually have to face the consequences of our actions. For now, though, we were free. Boarding the plane felt like stepping into a new world. We were leaving behind the weight of Sandra's judgment and the emotional strain of trying to fit into a family that, in many ways, had made me feel like an outsider. As the plane ascended into the sky, it felt symbolic, like we were rising above the expectations and disappointments that had been suffocating us. A new chapter of our lives was beginning, and we had chosen it together. Meanwhile, back with the family, the fallout from our decision was unfolding. When Tom eventually turned his phone back on, it buzzed incessantly with a flood of messages. The screen lit up with text from Sandra and other family members, a whirlwind of confusion, outrage, and disbelief. Each message seemed to react more dramatically than the last, filled with shock and accusations. But Sandra's messages stood out, sharp and dripping with blame. "How could you embarrass me like this? This is irresponsible and utterly selfish. Her text read, each word more cutting than the last. Her words stung. But as the plane descended into San Francisco, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, the noise of the family's discontent felt far away. We were on the verge of a new adventure, one that we had chosen for ourselves, and the negativity felt distant and unimportant in that moment. Ahead of us lay a new path, full of possibility, where we were free to make our own choices. San Francisco welcomed us with its iconic fog rolling in from the bay and the lively hum of the city streets. For the first time in what felt like ages, Tom and I could enjoy each other's company without the looming shadow of Sandra's disapproval. We wandered through Fisherman's Wharf, sharing clam chowder in sourdough bread bowls, and snapped pictures under the majestic Golden Gate Bridge. It felt liberating to explore the city together, free from the emotional weight we had been carrying. But even as we lost ourselves in the beauty of San Francisco, Tom's phone continued to buzz with messages from his family. Though he tried to protect me from the worst of it, I could see the tension in his eyes. He was holding back, trying to shelter me from the full force of the backlash. Reality, we knew, would be waiting for us when we returned home. And reality hit hard the moment we arrived back. We hadn't even set our luggage down when we saw Sandra's car parked outside, a storm brewing, before we even stepped through the door. As soon as we entered the house, she stormed inside, her face twisted with rage and hurt. "How could you two be so selfish? Just running off like that," she snapped, her voice sharp and cutting. Tom, trying to remain calm, replied, "Mom, we needed to do what was best for us. We felt excluded and unwelcome." Sandra's face twisted further in anger. "That's no excuse to humiliate me in front of the entire family," she shouted. I tried to step in, hoping to de-escalate the situation. "Sandra, we didn't mean to upset you, but before I could finish, she cut me off. "Don't you dare butt in, young lady," she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. "You're the reason my son is turning against me." In an instant, Sandra lunged forward and slapped me across the face. The sting wasn't just physical. It was a painful reminder of the toxicity we had been trying to escape. Tom immediately stepped between us, his face a mix of shock and outrage. "That's enough, Mom," he said, his voice firm. "You can't just come here and attack Emma like that." The situation spiraled out of control from there. Sandra continued hurling accusations, her voice rising with each insult. There was no reasoning with her. Tom had no choice but to call the police. When the officers arrived, the tension in the room was thick. After explaining the situation and showing them the red mark on my cheek, we pressed charges. Sandra was taken away, still spewing anger and resentment as the officers led her out of the house. When the door finally closed behind them, the house fell into a heavy silence. Tom and I sat down, the adrenaline that had carried us through the confrontation fading away, leaving behind only exhaustion and sadness. We had escaped for a brief moment, but reality had followed us home. We were no longer the same couple that nervously hatched a plan in an airport coffee shop. We had been through too much, but through it all, we had grown stronger, more united. Our journey wasn't just about escaping Sandra's toxic influence. It was about embracing our right to create our own family story. A story built on love, mutual respect, and the understanding that we deserve better than the treatment we had received. As moving day approached, I glanced around at the packed boxes that surrounded us. They were more than just symbols of a fresh start. They represented our readiness to move forward into a life that we had chosen for ourselves. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of a bold new chapter. A chapter filled with hope, peace, and the promise of building something beautiful on our own terms. As we closed the door on our old life, we stepped confidently into our future, ready to write our own narrative.